Since the dawn of civilization, the Egyptians have embarked on a journey to the afterlife, preparing their tombs with meticulous care to ensure a safe passage into eternity. But behind the magnificence of their works lies a dark warning. Whoever dares to disturb the pharaoh's eternal rest risks facing the wrath of the gods and the curse of those who guard his tomb. Stories of mysterious, premature deaths, relentless misfortune, and inexplicable events have surrounded the discoveries of brave archaeologists who dared to challenge the ancient prophecies. From the legends of Tutankhamun to the tomb of Ramses the Great, the curse has manifested itself in terrible and unexpected ways, defying human rationality and leaving behind an aura of terror and superstition. But what lies behind this millennia-old curse? Is it merely coincidence? Or is there something more sinister moving in the shadows of the pyramids? A brand new study just published by researcher Ross Fellows investigates the origins of this terrifying legend, and with the support of concrete data and facts, traces a new line of research that opens the way to incredible possibilities capable of shaking everything we thought we knew about this ancient and mysterious people. But before diving into this fascinating study, if you haven't already, we invite you to subscribe to the channel to support our work and not miss our new videos. In 1922, after years of searching, British archaeologist Howard Carter discovered the tomb of Tutankhamun, the pharaoh who lived during the 18th dynasty and died at the age of just 19. Tutankhamun's reign was in fact very short. His life was cut off at a young age by a mysterious illness, but he became one of the best-known pharaohs of ancient Egypt thanks to the discovery of his tomb, which had remained intact for millennia. But not only that, a terrible legend claims that all those who came into contact with this extraordinary discovery were struck by a curse that soon led them to their deaths. And this was promptly confirmed just a few weeks after the discovery, when Lord Carnarvon, the financier of Carter's expedition, died of a not clearly specified illness that manifested with symptoms of blood poisoning and pneumonia. But this was only the first in a series of mysterious deaths that struck researchers, grave robbers, and even simple workers who had taken part in the excavation. So, is there truly a link between these enigmatic deaths and the curse that the ancient Egyptians had prophesied for anyone who dared to violate these sacred places? According to researcher Ross Fellows, yes. And the cause is to be attributed to radiation poisoning, which affected all those involved in the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, and not just that one. Many men and women, in fact, are said to have paid with their lives for their thirst for knowledge. Carter himself, for example, some years after the discovery, died of a very aggressive lymphoma. Clearly, Fellows' theory is extraordinary, but as we will see later, it is not the result of mere suggestion. It is supported by facts and concrete data that we are sure will capture your attention and leave you anything but indifferent. Those who break into this tomb will meet death from an illness that no physician can diagnose. A study conducted between 1999 and 2005 showed that the incidence of hematopoietic tumors, that is, those whose primary cause is radiation exposure, is proportionally higher in Egypt than in any other country with comparable environmental conditions. This incidence was vaguely attributed to factors linked to modern lifestyles, such as diet and industrial pollutants. However, this view has been firmly refuted by evidence from ancient Egypt. Numerous forensic studies have confirmed, in fact, an unexpectedly high incidence of hematopoietic tumors, even in antiquity. Analyses of skeletons from various sites and periods revealed examples of multiple osteolytic lesions, from myeloma, degenerative joint diseases, cranial porosity, and nasopharyngeal carcinoma, at rates much higher than in modern populations. This, according to several researchers, strongly disproves the idea that such tumors can be considered solely a modern disease. A further study examined the causes of death of around 500 Egyptologists who worked on archaeological sites between the 1800s and the 2000s. The analysis of these data revealed numerous premature and sudden deaths, and among them, several illustrious victims. In addition to the already mentioned Carter and Carnarvon, we find Jean-François Champollion, famous for his translations, who spent many years studying the texts inside the pyramids of Saqqara until, in 1832, he died at the age of 41, from exhaustion and apoplexy, along with 5 of his companions. Auguste Mariette, pioneer of the excavations at Saqqara, suffered from various illnesses and near blindness before collapsing from a violent hemorrhage and dying at 59. The eminent British Egyptologist Walter Bryan Emery spent many years digging for artifacts until he collapsed inside a tomb at Saqqara and died within hours. The American archaeologist George Reisner spent years excavating the mastabas of Giza until, at the age of 75, he collapsed inside the Great Pyramid and died of suspected poisoning. But among the suspicious deaths, we also find that of one of the most famous historical figures in human history, Napoleon Bonaparte. Perhaps it is nothing more than a suggestion or just a historical curiosity, but Napoleon Bonaparte did in fact lead a military and scientific expedition to Egypt, during which he explored its ancient ruins and, according to some accounts, even spent the night inside the Great Pyramid. Napoleon would die at only 51 years old after suffering for months from nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, and blood clots, which the post-mortem autopsy attributed to stomach cancer. Once again, this may be nothing more than speculation, but the data examined in this study show that of the 500 analyzed cases of researchers who had actively worked in certain sites of ancient Egypt, as many as 119 died of sudden and not fully explained illnesses. To this, we must add that the exact cause of death, especially in the older cases, was often not reported at all, or was linked to generic symptoms described by the patient rather than to a precise forensic examination. To this, we must further add that certain forms of cancer were not even known in ancient times. Leukemia, for instance, was only defined in the mid-1800s, and lymphoma at the end of the 19th century. So, what do these data show? Were the researchers who contributed to the discoveries in ancient Egypt victims of some undefined radiation poisoning? Or is it all just coincidence? To better understand the question raised by fellows, we must take a step back and examine some specific peculiarities of ancient Egyptian civilization. In ancient Egypt, death was not a mere end, but a passage into another existence, a divine realm where the pharaoh, like Osiris, the solar god, joined the gods. The mastaba, the monumental tomb shaped like a truncated pyramid, was the sacred place where this miraculous event took place. According to legend, Osiris, after being killed by his brother Seth, was resurrected thanks to the intervention of his wife Isis and his son Horus. His body was prepared with magical rites and placed inside a stone chest. Transformed into incandescent light, Osiris ascended to the sky, reuniting with his father Ra. This is a religious and humanized interpretation of an ancient rite, which essentially reinterprets something that perhaps the ancient Egyptians themselves could not fully understand. In fact, Osiris' body, during preparation for the rite, was said to be nourished with cakes and beer, and then placed inside a stone chamber where it was magically transformed into incandescent light and ascended to the heavens to join the Father God. The earliest Egyptians of the Old Kingdom believed this process to be literally and physically real, achieved through alchemy or magic, and beyond the comprehension of ordinary men. After the interruption of the First Intermediate Period, ordinary Egyptians inherited the funerary literature of the Old Kingdom, which was said to contain great secrets. The ancient texts indeed warned against revealing their mysteries. The Book of the Dead also made a distinction between the earlier kings of the Old Kingdom and ordinary humanity, which was characterized as common people. The means by which this transformation and ascension to the heavens occurred was the invisible efflux contained in the magical offerings. Osiris, for example, declares in the coffin text, "I have power through the offerings. I proceed by means of the efflux, by means of magic. Take in the efflux, thus you shall not be inert. Proceed from the blazing fire. I have consumed the magic of the spirits of the magical food. The souls are within me. The shadows are within me. I am transformed into powerful spirits. I shine in the sun. From the efflux, I am the Ancient One. My soul holds power in its primordial form." In Egyptian funerary texts, these offerings were called kefau, a magical food that played a crucial role in the pharaoh's resurrection process. Described as cakes and beer, or bread and milk, This food was not merely a ritual offering, but a key element in the transformation of the ruler's body. Among the magical foods, saffron cakes held particular importance. Symbolizing the Eye of Horus, the sky god, these cakes were offered to Osiris to nourish his soul and prepare him for his journey into eternity. In the coffin text, a series of spells describes in detail the preparation and consumption of this magical food. The efflux, an energetic substance drawn from the food, was associated with the movement of the sun and was administered in specific portions. But what was this magical food that had the potential to make the pharaoh's soul transcend into the heights of the sky? Surprisingly, some researchers have found a curious analogy between the description of the kifo, considered magical food in the Egyptian texts, and the processes of modern nuclear technology. Yellow cake, the raw mineral uranium-235, the primary fuel for nuclear energy, in fact presents characteristics similar to the magical food described in the ancient texts. Raw yellow cake alone, however, is not sufficient to trigger a nuclear reaction and must be enriched to a higher concentration. This process gives the substance the form of a cooled, milky liquid. It is precisely this milky aspect that seems to be cryptically described in the coffin text, where the processing is reminiscent of the purification of the magical food and its preparation for Osiris' consumption. Osiris received the milky fluid from the breast of Isis. He received the efflux from the cold drink, the efflux of decomposition. The cold drink is yours, the efflux is yours, the powers are within it. The body of the pharaoh then, nourished with these specific elements, would have triggered a reaction that produced a violent light and extreme heat. Physical evidence found inside the Great Pyramid surprisingly seems to support this incredible theory. The inner walls of the king's chamber were initially reported as polished marble because they reflected the light of the explorers' torches, but it was later understood that they were vitrified granite caused by an extreme source of heat. The stone sarcophagus is made of ordinary gray granite, but its surface has a dark brown, unnatural color, as if it had been scorched by intense heat, and its edges show signs of melting. This heat, according to some scholars, could have been generated by a nuclear reaction triggered by the kifo. This uranium-based technology would also have produced radioactive waste products, which would then have been managed through burial, and evidence for this practice exists both in texts and in physical remains. In Egyptian legend, for example, it is said that upon Osiris' death, the pieces of his body were enclosed in a lead-lined coffin and buried deep underwater. This description matches the structure of the so-called Tomb of Osiris at Giza, which consists of a vertical shaft 30 meters deep filled with water, at the bottom of which lay a dacite sarcophagus weighing about 40 tons. The basalt chests on the second level, about 20 meters below, were examined with a Geiger counter and found to be intensely radioactive, especially inside them. Still at Giza, specifically in the warehouses, in the basement, in the Valley Temple of Khafra, and in the second level of the shaft of the Tomb of Osiris we have just mentioned, unusually high levels of radiation have been detected, while in several underground tombs at Saqqara, radon, a radioactive gas emitted during the decay of uranium, has been identified. These radiation levels, believed to be higher than the natural radioactivity present in the soil, suggest that these sites may in fact have been intended for the storage of radioactive waste and undoubtedly call for further investigation. This thesis also seems to be confirmed by ancient texts found in Egypt, where it is clearly stated that the body of Osiris, or rather what was left of it, was to be considered waste material, and humanity was warned to stay away from these remains, as harmful spirits would be present. But Fellow's study does not stop there. It goes in search of further evidence and analyzes the mastabas, the monumental tombs used during the early stages of Egyptian civilization. The mastabas of ancient Egypt are an intricate enigma, and they apparently contain none of the elements we would expect from a burial. No mummies, no skeletons, no elaborate grave goods. At first, they were nothing more than simple pits in the ground. Later, over time, they evolved into true monuments, rectangular raised structures with two inner rooms and a deep shaft leading to an underground burial chamber. But the strangest thing is that these mastabas were all the same. No matter how important the deceased was, the tomb always had the exact same appearance. And at least in the beginning, there were no decorations at all, only plain stones, stripped of any ornamentation. Archaeologists have found all sorts of things inside mastabas: statues, everyday objects, even votive offerings, but not a single trace of a mummy, a skeleton, or even a bone. So where did the bodies go? The very etymology of the word mastaba may provide a further clue. In Arabic, mastaba means bench or platform, an association that came from the terminology used by local workers and adopted by the first European archaeologists. However, the form and function of these structures bear no real resemblance to a bench, which led researchers to explore another possibility. Mastaba may derive instead from the Old Persian bank, meaning bunker or vault, a term far more fitting since these structures are characterized by underground spaces and hidden chambers. Moreover, bank does not mean a bench to sit on, but rather a secure place to store something valuable or dangerous. The primary and original function of the Egyptian mastabas was the long-term storage of large quantities of offerings in ceramic containers. Over time, the belief developed that these offerings, such as beer or wine, were destined for religious rituals, to appease the gods or assist the dead in their passage to the afterlife. This interpretation, however, was influenced by later religious practices and by Euro-Christian Egyptologists, who mistakenly read depictions of processions as funeral ceremonies. In reality, the original offerings were not beverages, nor were they ceremonially presented on an altar, but were simply stockpiled in the underground chambers. A striking example is the mastaba at Saqqara, later expanded into a much larger multi-layered structure that we now know as the Step Pyramid of Djoser. During Djoser's reign, thousands of jars were transferred from Abydos to Saqqara into a new underground storage beneath the Step Pyramid. This transfer was not a ceremonial act, but rather a large-scale operation known as refeeding. In other words, the Abydos site, where these mysterious jars had originally been kept, had deteriorated over the centuries and needed to be replaced. This led to the relocation of around 40,000 jars placed in deep tunnels carved under Djoser's pyramid. This operation is described in the Famine Stela, where it is said that Pharaoh Djoser saved the country from a terrible famine aggravated by a plague that was leading the people to death. But what caused this plague? Could it have been linked to the Abydos site, where the mysterious jars were stored? The jars of Djoser also conceal another mystery, but briefly, among their peculiarities, these jars appear as strange objects, being made from an extremely hard stone that the ancient Egyptians supposedly could not have worked with the technology available at that time. In that earlier video, we emphasized how unusual it was for the Egyptians to have used such a complex material to make simple jars, apparently intended only to store food and drink. The study we are analyzing now, however, may provide a more realistic explanation. The jars did not contain food, but far more likely a kind of sludge or mortar. This sludge may have been radioactive waste produced by the use of uranium during the rites of ascension to the heavens. Was it the presence of this radioactive sludge leaking from the Abydos site that caused the mysterious epidemic during Djoser's reign? And was this the real reason why these jars were made from such a hard, unworkable stone like diorite? To answer these questions, Fellows Research invites us to re-examine the interpretation of certain ancient symbols on the Abydos jar labels. But before looking at that symbolism, we need a premise. Modern physics distinguishes three types of radiation: alpha and beta particles and gamma rays. Alpha particles are relatively large, slow, and weakly penetrating. Beta particles are very small, highly active, and moderately penetrating. Gamma rays, however, travel only in straight lines, are highly penetrating, and extremely harmful to bone marrow, with exposure leading to hematopoietic cancers. The ancient Egyptian system also described two types of soul or spirit emerging from the remains of Osiris's body, the Be and the Ka. The Bia was initially represented as the abstract symbol of a bird. The labels on the Abydos jars distinguish two types of birds that curiously resemble the modern designations for alpha and beta radiation. Following this logic, we could say that alpha radiation was represented as a large, slow goose. Beta radiation, on the other hand, was depicted as a small, agile bird often shown escaping up the vertical shaft of the mastaba. The Ka, which we might associate with gamma rays, considered much more powerful and dangerous, was initially represented as the head of a serpent, and later as upraised human arms and hands. As we know, radioactive waste is extremely dangerous, partly because it lasts so long. For example, technetium has a half-life of 211,000 years. It is therefore curious to note that the drawings on Egyptian mastabas show enormous numbers of specific birds. For instance, 111,000 doves, 11,100 generic birds, or 120,000 ducks or geese. These large numbers suggest the existence of a code indicating the expected lifespan of the waste stored in the mastaba shafts. Another interesting fact is that in the mastaba, the burial chamber was offset from the shaft, as if to limit the escape of gamma rays, which, as we saw, travel only in straight lines. Mastaba murals also showed smaller bowbirds escaping upward through the vertical shaft. In the raised superstructure, the inner chamber was positioned directly above the underground burial chamber, the shortest distance for detecting possible gamma ray leaks. This chamber contained a K symbol, indicating it was for the Kai. The chamber was also ventilated by small holes at the top and was used to house live birds, which acted as canaries in the coal mine to detect possible Ka leaks. Numerous texts refer to the continuous delivery of live birds to the mastaba, likely the sacred ibis. The historian Josephus, for example, recorded that the ancient Egyptians kept ibises in cages to detect evil serpents. Birds, as we know, are extremely sensitive to radiation. Following all these clues, we may hypothesize that the mastaba was designed to store and safely manage radioactive waste for millions of years. Its structure and operation appear to reflect a profound understanding of radioactivity and its dangers. The deep burial chamber, for instance, was cut 30 meters into the bedrock to create a physical barrier against radiation leakage, especially gamma rays. The radioactive waste was sealed in very hard and dense stone jars, similar to sarcophagi, most likely to prevent the escape of penetrating radiation. The second outer chamber contained a sort of shelf for presenting food offerings. This was a second ingenious strategy to detect the presence of sterilizing gamma radiation. If the food placed on the shelf failed to decompose normally, it was a clear sign of dangerous radiation. The tombs of the first and second dynasties at Abydos appear much simpler, often just shallow pits with little or no covering. Evidence suggests that it was precisely this lack of protection that led to radioactive leaks. Confirming this, several Egyptian texts mention Abydos as the site of refining and enrichment of the magical efflux, suggesting that radioactive material may indeed have been processed there. Manetho's History of Egypt also describes a grave plague during the reign of Jet, which could have been caused by radiation exposure. At Abydos, moreover, hundreds of subsidiary tombs have been found containing young men and women of 20 to 25 years old, apparently healthy, who may have died from radiation poisoning. Finally, studies on Old Kingdom skeletons have shown a significant incidence of degenerative joint disorders and cranial porosity, conditions that can result from radiation exposure, as well as famine or plague. We began with the curse of Tutankhamun's tomb, and after a journey through time and the most mysterious places of ancient Egypt, we can now say that behind what some authors romantically defined as the curse of Tutankhamun, there may lie something far more unsettling and mysterious, something that undoubtedly opens the door to countless questions. Fellows' research is deeply intriguing. For those who wish to delve deeper, you will find a link to his work in the description of this video, and it is undeniable that it raises a series of questions that are not easy to answer. Unless, of course, we are willing to question everything we thought we knew about the history of ancient Egypt. But now, having reached this point, we are truly curious to know your opinion. Write in the comments what you think. And if you enjoyed the video and want to support our work, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hi, I'm John. Our journey into mystery continues. If you want to uncover more hidden truths and answers to the greatest enigmas, leave a like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Together, we'll explore the unknown, and who knows what secrets we'll find.